Navruped, y'all. I'm a pediatrician. I was so honored to be asked to give this introduction speech. It's probably going to go down as one of the great honors of my life, so thank you, Suzie. Suzie's come to be one of my greatest friends, and so I really hope that I can do her justice in just these few minutes that I have. I met Suzie about 5 years ago when I first started my first official job as an attending pediatrician. This was a huge period of transition in my life, and I should have been thriving. It was a really good turning point. Lots of things were going right. But for some reason instead, I was feeling all of the hurt that I had unknowingly been carrying throughout my whole life. So what better time for the universe to send me a friend and mentor in the form of the woman you're going to be meeting in just a few minutes. So throughout these years, Suzie shared so many of her experiences with me, and through those conversations, I started to heal probably for the first time ever in my life. She's lived and she's learned so much, and she's given me a great head start on my own path towards healing. And so I started to refer to her as my wise owl, and she truly is that. She is wise, as you will see once you all read her book. Suzie will talk to you today about how she's managed through her own struggles and how she's found sobriety, and I'm so proud of her for that. Her path, however unpretty it was at times, is proof that those who society might judge the most often have the most beautiful role to play in others' lives, as she has in mine. And looking back to our long conversations, I like to think that all along she was writing her book. You're welcome. So I'm certain that I speak for everyone who knows Suzie when I say that this woman is an actual force of nature. She is unstoppable. She can do everything, and she does do everything. She does so much. So I first came to know her as an amazing labor and delivery nurse anesthetist. But that's just her day job. She's also active in politics at the state and national level. She's president-elect of the Ohio State Association of Nurse Anesthesia. At the age of 50, she decided to go back to school to get her doctorate of nursing practice, despite having already earned 2 bachelor degrees and a master's in nursing earlier in her life. Her NP thesis focused on substance abuse disorders in women, and for that, her work is now pending publication. Even with all of these achievements, she's somehow found time to give back even more by starting a support group for mothers who are working on sobriety. She is a badass feminist boss queen. She's a fierce ally to anyone who needs it, and above all, a fabulous friend, wife, mother, and mentor. And if that isn't already amazing enough, today, for the first time, she's going to present herself to the world as author. So without further ado, I offer you all a chance to meet my wise owl for yourself and to hear her story and start on your path. So please welcome to the stage our keynote speaker, Suzie Newell.
Now I got to live up to all this, right? So I'm Suzie Newell, and like Ruby said, I'm going to be talking to you about my journey here, and about coping mechanisms, and about a little bit about the neuroscience behind that. It's amazing that Callie and I didn't talk about our talking points, because she couldn't have set me up better. She really did a nice job with that. So I handed Madeline Jana 366, but that's a long story, entries, and she gathered a team and created a work of art and handed it back to me. So I really need to thank her and Matthew Vanderlyn for all the work that they did on this book, and I can't take credit. I just said, here's some words, and they brought back art. They're also amazing musicians and will be playing after me and doing a few throwbacks. I threw a few originals, so a little bit of something for everyone. Angela Fack does all of my product placement photography and my self-photography, and she also does my social media, makes me look really good, and combined with the Canton Girl Gang, I'm super grateful that they did this, and thank you all for being here today. I'm so grateful. Anything that's not her is Adobe stock photos in this presentation, and I need to say that because I did get my doctorate. So I also I tire of creating research tabs on a PowerPoint, so I've just put a whole bunch of the research that I use on my website, www.thepath365.com, and you can find anything I reference on the tab that says, what does it say? Evolving list of research. So I don't have to hold myself accountable. Okay, this is why we're here today. In 2017, on January 3rd at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from my niece, Shannon. She was 5 months pregnant with my sister's first grandbaby. And before I answered the phone, before I looked at anything, I rolled over and looked at it and said out loud to my husband, "Oh my God, Kathy's dead." You didn't need to tell me that my sister had overdosed. I knew it. So she just couldn't get it, right? She could not get it. I don't know if it was her inability to deal with her shame. Well, I do, but she didn't see herself as someone with a disease. Okay, so she walked around in denial. She walked around pretending. She walked around acting like she didn't have a disease because she didn't believe she had a disease. There was just too much shame. So, what are we talking about today? Just so you're clear, this isn't a talk about substance use disorder. That's just where my journey begins. We're going to talk about the concepts behind my work, and we're going to talk about kind of how I got there. And then we'll talk about how I discovered that these concepts are good for everyone, right? And then we'll talk about, I wrote the book, and we'll bust down the book a little bit so you understand what it means. So after we got this horrifying phone call, I went home to Minnesota for my sister's wake, because we had an Irish wake for her, which, if you know anything about an Irish wake, you sit around, drink, you tell stories. And yes, I do totally understand the irony there that we have a sister who overdosed and we're all sitting around drinking in her favor. But that's my family. So off we go. And I come back and I go back to work. And I work in the Mid-Ohio Valley. And like Ruby mentioned, I do obstetric anesthesia. I work, and it is like many communities, Callie had mentioned this, many communities in this region of the country in particular are decimated by the opioid crisis. Decimated. So that day, I have put epidurals in 3 women in active heroin addiction. So I go back to my call room, little cubby room that I hang out in, and I looked through the stuff that my friends had given me that were saying, sorry for your loss and that kind of stuff. And there was an angel there that my friend Dana gave me, and I was staring at it, and I just started to cry. And I kept thinking, why didn't she get it? Why couldn't she get it? And I became increasingly convinced it was because there was too much shame. Kathy identified first and foremost as a mother. She was a lot of things. I mean, she had her master's in special ed education, but she identified as a mother first of her 3 beautiful children. And in order for her to do the work that she needed to do to get sober, she'd have to admit that she was an addict and that she had done all these terrible things. And I just think she couldn't face the shame of that. She couldn't admit it. So why do some people get sober? Because here's the thing, they do. They get sober. That's artwork from the book, just so you know. So it's easier in my family to talk about the people who don't struggle with substance use disorder or addiction. In my immediate family growing up, I had a grandmother, and she would have a martini. She would drink a martini every once in a while. She'd drink one. Sometimes she'd have two. It was like the weirdest thing. We never had seen this in my family before. So that's it. That's the extent of the people that don't struggle with addiction in my family. I was the last of a rowdy bunch of kids, and we all used alcohol to cope. That is how we coped as a family. When I was 16, my father finally died of a long, long battle of cancer. And by the time I was 19, I was drinking a 2-liter bottle of vodka a day. I had not seen a sober minute other than sleep for over a year at 19. And my mother, with her glass of vodka, was like, you really need to cut back. You can't drink this much. You're much too young. That's how we handle. So I have the great fortune of being from the state of Minnesota, which is the home of the Hazelden Foundation. And if you know anything about the Hazelden Foundation, it's like they practically invented mental health, right? They own the Betty Ford Foundation. They created like a bunch of huge treatment centers across the country. If you have a diagnosis of anything, they've published a book about it that you can like buy from their foundation. So I knew what to do. I knew at this, I was open, I was 19, I was young, and I knew I needed to go to treatment, so I went to treatment. I had the benefit of youth and the benefit of that openness, and my early adult enculturation did not include any kind of shame associated with getting sober, and I was entrenched in the ideals of mental health. So for the most part, I stayed sober most of my adult life, except for, and you've heard the story a million times, a brief, interesting, fascinating period in my 30s when I got a bottle of pills this big, which we used to hand out, and I chewed them down like candy because I made the mistake of thinking that chemicals were different. and it took me a little bit of time to get back to that place where I reaffirmed those sober choices. But again, I have been sober most of my adult life. I had no shame with it. I knew what I had to do. It took me a minute, but I did it. So Kathy identified as a mother first. And because we do this thing called mental health so poorly as a healthcare system, we judged her. And she judged herself. So I thought if shame was kind of the defining feature of why she didn't get sober, I needed to do something and to help kind of break the stigma of moms getting sober. I worked on this unit. I saw it every day. And I decided to start a group creatively titled Moms Getting Sober. and it worked. It went really well. I had people from the community coming in. It really changed the way even the nurses on the floor addressed addiction. And they... like the gals that delivered there that were part of my group would say, hey, I didn't feel so ashamed. I wasn't so scared. Because, shame is a huge part of this disease, right? And that's, like I said, this talk isn't about substance use disorder, but it's an important part of how I began to understand everything. And so then COVID happened, right? So we have this little room where we would all meet on the hospital right next to the unit, and all of a sudden I have to put it online. And I was nervous about that, but it turns out that was really a good thing for me because for two reasons. One, I don't work there anymore, and I get to still do what I call series. I do like 6-week series where we have meetings for 6 weeks based on a theme. And then the second thing is that people from California to Maryland are showing up at these meetings. So it's kind of neat. It's fun. But it's still the same core group of people in Mansfield are there, and that's really special to me. So I started down this rabbit hole about coping mechanisms, and I decided to go back to school and get my doctorate because I don't know why. I did. It's just a thing. And then I had trouble sitting still. And so I ended up really learning about the neuroscience behind coping mechanisms for women. Like I said, we do this thing so poorly as a healthcare system. The National Institute of Drug Abuse did a study in 2017 that showed, it was a huge study, like they investigated kind of all aspects of the effects of drugs and alcohol on society and came up with an estimate about the cost to society and came up with $740 billion a year in costs related to healthcare and crime related to illicit drug use, alcohol, and tobacco. And this has been 5 years now. And last year was the CDC reported the largest death by overdose ever in the history of recorded overdose deaths. The largest death by overdose was last year. And people, like Callie mentioned, we're not talking about this anymore because we're all talking about COVID. But this is a fall through the cracks, horrid part of this disease. Let me put this to you a different way, because our healthcare system, the point is that we have that going on, those costs. If you show up to the hospital, there's no choice for you. We might not even have a detox center in our hospital. Most hospitals don't have a detox center. They don't have anything to handle you but $740 billion in costs. So say you're going to come into the hospital. You got Hank. Hank comes in. Hank struggles with his weight. He's 400 pounds. He's sweating. He comes in. He's gray. He's in the ER, and he presents himself to the nurse, and the nurse says, "What's up, Hank? What's going on?" He says, "I don't feel really well." And she smells his breath is real fruity, and immediately she knows what to do. The wheels go into action. She gets blood sugar on him. It turns out it's 500. And she gets an insulin drip started, gets him transferred to the ICU, gets a nurse navigator. In the next couple of days, the guy has his entire family in there. He's got a nurse navigator, a nurse educator, a diabetic educator who educates the whole family about how to feed Hank. And Hank can do he gets out and he can do one of three things here. Hank maybe he loses 200 pounds and he's genetically blessed and he never has to deal with diabetes again. He's made these great lifestyle changes and he gets better. Or maybe he loses 100 pounds or he's not so genetically blessed and he struggles a little bit, but all he has to do, he doesn't have to take the shots anymore. He only has to take a pill. Or maybe he's not genetically blessed or he can't lose the weight and he's on insulin for the rest of his life. But he's got an endocrinologist. He's got a healthcare system that understands his disease. So he goes about his business and lives his life with a disease that's being treated appropriately by a healthcare system. Then you got Henry. Henry comes in. He's sweating. He's skinny, little guy. He's sweating. He's gray. Feels sick. And his breath smells like alcohol. And the nurse comes up. And this is no fault to any healthcare worker. We're not taught this stuff. I learned this stuff independent of my training. And I've had a lot of training. Henry comes in and he says, I've been addicted to heroin. And I tried to get off heroin, so I've been taking benzos. And I ran out of benzos, and so now I've been drinking last day, but I feel really, really sick. And she's like, okay, have a seat. And he goes over, he sits down, he drops, and he has a seizure. But she doesn't realize that there was a key there when he said he went off those benzos, that he better be admitted right away because he's at high risk for a seizure. But she doesn't know that because we don't learn that stuff. We don't learn that. So he gets admitted, he gets into the ICU, and they treat his seizure. And then we call social services. Social services comes up and says, well, there's a detox center down the road or in the next town. If you're lucky, it's in your town. But it might be in a different part of the state. And there's a treatment center that maybe can take you, maybe can't, that maybe you can pay for, maybe you can't. So what happens to Henry? Henry gets discharged, and maybe Henry does get into a detox center. He goes through treatment. He starts taking care of himself. He does all the kind of assigned things that we do to cleanse our mind, and he gets healthy. So he can spend the rest of his life not worrying about this disease. Or maybe he struggles with depression. He relapses a couple times, and he takes one pill for depression. Or maybe he's not genetically blessed and he struggles a ton with all of this, and he has to be in a Suboxone clinic or a methadone clinic. But we have a healthcare system that's going to help him through this and understands that this is a disease, except for that actually isn't the truth. So we wonder why we have such a high relapse rate. There's more. So we can't throw a pill at this disease, right? You can't just fix mental health issues with a pill if you don't treat the whole problem. Callie touched on endorphins or she touched on dopamine. What we know about substance use disorder is you need a community, you need coping mechanisms. And within those coping mechanisms, you need something that's physical so that you can bring up what we call the endorphin levels. And endorphins, think natural morphine. This is real simple explanations. Natural morphine. And then you need something to quiet the mind that increases your dopamine levels. And dopamine, you kind of think natural antidepressant. They've done imaging studies on people with substance use disorder, and they have found out that people with substance use disorder, their brains are not making dopamine at all. They're literally not making any dopamine. So think about this for a second. You take a person who struggles with substance use disorder, and you take away all of the things that create an antidepressant, just make them feel normal, okay? So it's a physiological, make them feel normal is this dopamine. All of a sudden they don't have it, you take it away. How do you think that person feels? How do you think they feel internally? So there's a saying in recovery that we use, we call it the 4 horsemen. It's a vernacular that we use. The 4 horsemen are coming. The 4 horsemen are a lack of dopamine. Like you literally don't have any dopamine. So think of how you feel if everything that makes you feel normal is gone. Everything that makes you feel even remotely mental healthy is gone. Feel pretty flippin' desperate to get your hands on something that would make you feel better. That can make you feel aggressive. It can make you feel insane. It can make you feel desperate. It can make you do criminal acts. It can make you do horrifying things to your family because you just cannot stand the way you feel. It's horrifying to feel this way. And that is physiological. That's not someone who's weak. That's not someone who is just all of a sudden behaving like a lunatic. They don't have any dopamine. They have no capacity to feel normal. And we aren't computers. It takes months to retrain your brain. Think of a stroke victim, right? It takes months to retrain the brain to learn how to move that hand, okay? I don't know if any of you know my sister-in-law, Laura, but she's going through that now. It's been a year, and she still is having trouble with that hand. She still is working on it. The same thing has to happen for people with substance use disorder, okay? They need to retrain those pathways. They need to learn how to access that dopamine. You can't just hit the reset button, right? This stuff is biological. You need to put in the time. So I realized that when we talk about mental health, and I started thinking about the healthcare system, why do we call it mental health? Because we don't actually see it as biological, right? We see it as like a redheaded stepchild that we really don't want to be associated with. It's mental health. And I realize that we all have a little bit of this in us. I've been sober for most of my adult life, so I have kind of not sobriety issues anymore, right? My dopamine levels drop the same way your people who don't struggle with that disease drop. So I develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. You know what I mean? I do things that aren't that great. And I think we all have moments where our dopamine levels are down, our endorphins are down, we make unhealthy choices, right? And your brain health affects every part of who you are. From cancer to heart health, from immunity to just plain well-being. This is how your mental health affects you. And we all get sad sometimes, right? We all have periods where we don't know how to cope our entire lifetimes. We get paralyzed by fear. We get stuck. We choose ice cream or potato chips. We choose wine or lack of choice altogether. We bury ourselves in Netflix and yoga pants and we listen to that bitch in our heads and we tell ourselves we're not good enough and we get sad, right? Everybody does. There's two things going on here. This is dopamine, but we'll talk about endorphins first. Endorphin, you want to think body, right? So endorphins, you hear about the runner high. That's your endorphins. You're running, you get this rush of chemicals that nobody right? Nobody's here. We're not going to talk about that, but but you do things that are physical. You eat healthy. You go through this period. You're like, wow, I'm really killing this healthy body thing, and that's why you feel kind of elated because you have this natural morphine that's sort of increasing a little bit in your body. Now, dopamine is kind of interesting because dopamine develops when you quiet your mind, when you learn how to make all that shut up, okay? And the way you do that typically are things like meditation or spiritual choices or visualization, or you take a bath and you light a candle and you focus, or you do whatever it is that quiets your mind. And this builds your endorphin or your dopamine levels and allows you to kind of increase that antidepressive action in your body. So what's really funny to me about all of this is that when I read the literature on this stuff, because trust me, there's a ton of it. They have studied the crap out of this stuff and it's real. But when you read the literature, it's really entertaining because they don't want to sound like they're talking about God, right? They don't, real research doesn't like that terminology. You know, when I say, if God is what gets you there, I don't care. If meditation or exercise are what gets you there, I don't care. Whatever it takes to get you there, get there. That's my saying. Worse than the healthcare system, or the science is behind on this, but worse than that is the healthcare system, right? Our healthcare system is so behind on this because we have treated mental health like a social service problem and not a healthcare problem. So I wrote a book. So the book is Mind, Body, and Spirit Demystified, right? It's 366 entries that give you kind of an idea of how to do this stuff, okay? So this is number 3. This one's one of my favorite, and it was kind of how I started down this journey of writing this stuff. Open your heart, compassion is revolutionary. In order to heal from our history of trauma or abuse, we have to be open. And by trauma and abuse, I mean even last week at the grocery store when that guy was a jerk to you. You just have those moments where it hurts, right? The anxiety and pain are byproducts of fighting, and the internal war we feel flares up when we are shut down, living in fear, and listening to that voice in our heads. Tell that bitch to shut up. She isn't welcome here. Now let something else flow in. Let it replace the constant negativity. Compassion for yourself and others is a good place to start. It softens the edges, begins the healing. Picture your heart as a vessel and pour only from the elixir of life into it. Clean out all the pain and negativity. You're on a journey now and you no longer do bad things. Being wrong is natural. You learn how to improve and move forward. This is only possible if you're willing to learn, willing to be open to the possibilities, willing to take a leap of faith, and be really honest with yourself. Intention. What negativity keeps your heart from truly opening to others? So that is an entry from the book. Now, some of you are sitting out there going, I like that bitch part, but this business about the fountain, not so much. Doesn't matter. Maybe you like the fountain part and you don't like the bitch part. There's 366 entries. You can figure out something that works for you. And that's the whole point of it, is that it's individualized. You work through it. But also, you need to make sure that you understand that part of this quieting the mind thing is going to make you uncomfortable if you don't do it at first. But you got to do it because it's what opens that up. It's what increases that dopamine, and it's what makes us happier. Okay. Mind, body, spirit. We're going to bust it down because that's what this is about. Okay. So first, I studied the neuroscience behind coping mechanisms. I studied coping mechanisms. That's what I did. If you need professional help, I say it over and over and over again in this book. You get professional help, right? This is a tool. All right. Clean the mind. How do we start on cleaning the mind? We start by maybe reading books, right? Maybe read a self-help book. I might know one. Read books about grit, books about perseverance, even books about trauma, books about leadership, books about whatever diagnosis you think you're struggling with. And then do the work. Because you can't just read a book, toss it in the back of your car and be like, well, yeah, that really applies to me, and expect things to change, right? So you got to do the work. You got to write, you got to journal, you got to process through that stuff. And then, here's the part. You got to get rid of that little girl in your head saying all those nasty things. So you got to share it with someone. Otherwise, she's going to have dominion over this stuff. This is what's going wrong here, so you need to let it out. And when you let it out, you can let it out to a trusted friend, a counselor. You can let it out to a pastor. It doesn't matter. It's your choice. But be honest. Because here's the thing. What has happened to us in our past is nowhere near what we do to ourselves with that history. I'm going to say that again. What has happened to us in our past is nowhere near what we do to ourselves with this history. Why do we let the past keep us sick? If you struggle with things from your past, you're normal. Everybody has that, right? You work through it, you move through it. But if you choose to sit there and feel all that pain and not do anything about it, that's called suffering. And that is actually a choice. When I was sick, when I was younger and I was all messed up, I used to wrap myself in a cloak of angst and misery, right? I think I thought it was cool. Who would want to be like her? Who would want to be like that speaker up there? Who would want to be content? Because that's actually a thing. You can be content. So once I learned how to be healthy, I learned how to cleanse out that history, my mind, and I learned how to keep it clean. Body, everybody's favorite, right? These are all the things that we suck at in society and that we are obsessed with. This is exercise and healthy choices and diet. But here's the thing. It's not that exercise or that diet or that healthy choice. It's knowing that you need a little bit of help and learning how to get better at these things. So you ate a pint of ice cream, take a walk, right? If you want to learn how to exercise, try 100 different things and suck at every single one of them. Because here's the thing. I have actually tried 100 different things and sucked at every single one of them. It took me about 10 years to admit that I was a runner, right? People who know me are like, oh, you're a runner, you're so fast. I am not a fast runner. I'm really slow and really not very good at all. But I run, and part of the reason I run is that I'm lazy and I don't like to sign up for gym memberships and learn how to do these things. And I just want to throw on my running shoes, go outside, run, and I get the endorphins, right? Because as Elle Wood tells us in Legally Blonde, happy people don't kill their husbands. And my husband can tell you that he actually will ask me sometimes, have you run lately? Do you need to do some exercise? Because I do need to do that sometimes. So I got better by just doing it. And I was never very technique oriented or any of those things. And by doing a little bit at a time, I ran a marathon, and I ran lots of half marathons, and then I got into the whole building your muscles thing. Mind you, my times were awful. They weren't great, but then I did the Spartan, and then I got girlfriends together, and we did a warrior dash, and all these different kinds of things, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I have a bunion, can't run anymore, and I'm taking care of it. Eventually, I actually have time off now where I think I actually can schedule it finally. But I'm doing the elliptical now instead. And who's good at the elliptical? You don't know. Who cares, right? Nobody knows if you're good at the elliptical. Just get on it and do it. But I'm also doing yoga because I go on and off with yoga. It's one of those things. I think everybody should do yoga. It's the greatest thing. The woman on the YouTube will look at you and be like, you're doing great. And I'm like, I know, right? I'm doing so well. I can. Look at that. Look at that. Oh, I'm really good at yoga. So you want to get better at eating. You throw out the bag of candy and you don't buy it the next time. But not today. Buy the candy because oh my God, it's so good. But and the next time you make a lot of little choices like that. And in 5 years, you've lost 20 pounds or 30 pounds. But that's not the point. And that's not the goal. The goal is to get on the path and make those choices. The rest of it is what happens when you're busy doing all the right things. I'm going to take a minute here because it's body, and I think women need to hear this. I have struggled my entire life. People go, oh, you don't know, you're skinny. I have had an eating disorder of one type or another my entire life, from anorexia to bulimia and everything in between. But I'm a whole hell of a lot better at it now because I make those little choices. 20 years ago, kind of a mess. Now, I'm good. I never will do eating perfectly. I love sugar, and I will spend an entire day just eating sugar. But I don't eat 5 pounds of sugar anymore. So that's good, right? That's improvement. Spirit. It's my favorite topic. I love to shed light on the research behind this stuff because it's something that we just don't do in healthcare. We don't talk about this stuff at all. We've talked about how when you quiet your mind, you build that dopamine, right? You can do that through lots of different choices. You can do it through I listed all those before, right? The meditation, the spiritual path, praying. See, I knew this guy. I did know this guy. We'll call him John. And John, every time I saw him, it was painful, right? John struggled with methamphetamines. He was a meth addict. And he'd be like, every time you saw him, and he was sweaty and he smelled, and it was painful to see him, and you just felt so bad for John. You just wanted him to get help. And then one day I'm at the Starbucks, and John comes through the door, and he's bright-eyed. And I look at him, and I'm like, hey, John, what's going on? He's like, hey, Suze, what are you doing? He goes, I'm growing in the Lord, Suze. I'm growing in the Lord. John is mainlining dopamine. And you know what? That's awesome. Good for John. Because I don't care how you get there. I don't care if you know, some of you are sitting out there going, you know what, Suze, that's not my deal. I'm not religious, or I'm not Christian, or I'm not whatever. That's fine. You develop a path that works for you. As long as you are doing the exercises that create the healthy response, I don't care how you get there. That's on you. That's between you and whatever it is you believe. So you're Jewish or Muslim or Sikh or Taoist or Buddhist or Hindu, or maybe you're a witch. Maybe you're a pagan. Who cares? I don't care. Just do what you need to do to get there. If science is your thing, awesome. That's great. A lot of mystery in science. We don't know everything, right? So what you need to do is focus on whatever it is that makes you feel like you're quieting the back of that mind. And then don't worry about anybody else. Because here's the thing. In this time where we have so much division, let's stop judging everybody else. Please take a minute to let somebody be on a path that works for them. If we look at the world from both a scientific and a faithful perspective, this is my take. Going to do a little groovy visualization here. Kind of picture the night sky, right? And bring yourself back to a place where you can quiet all that stuff in your mind. The Big Bang is actually not an explosion in space, but rather an expansion of space. So what that means is the universe expands to include literally everything. If the universe that maybe a higher power that you believe in created, or maybe not, can expand to include everything, then maybe we should let our hearts and minds do the same. So that is the Path 365. The Path is an answer to a healthcare system that says mental health isn't health. The Path allows you to suck at something and get better. Did you fall off? Get back on. The Path says we want everyone to be healthy. The Path says, do you need moms getting sober? Rock on, sister. No shame. The Path says, this is how we get and stay healthy. Because it's not just mental health, it's health. Thank you.